Well, today we're going to talk about this particular 1973 Luxury LeMans, and I think it's finished in a color called Desert Sand, almost like a yellow ochre kind of color. I'm trying to decide if I like it or not. It's pretty yellow, but in any case, this was the second year for the Luxury LeMans. The Luxury LeMans was introduced in 1972, and it was introduced, interestingly, on the last year of that previous generation A-body. 1973 would be the second year for the Luxury LeMans, but the first year the Luxury LeMans obviously appeared on an all-new car. All the A-bodies were new for the 1973 model year, not just the LeMans, but also the Cutlass, as well as the Regal and the Malibu. So there was a totally different styling on these vehicles than the previous generation. All of them, by the way, had just dual headlamps instead of quad headlamps. I think that was so that GM could save money. But this particular A-body for 1973 is one of my favorites. I wish this car were a little bit different color, but it does show off the various features of it. First of all, obviously up front, you have that very prominent nose that was probably blunted a little bit because of the bumper impact standards here. Notice how large the bumper is. But that was this signature Pontiac nose that came from the Grand Prix as an example, kind of dated back to the 1969 Grand Prix, and even before that, Pontiacs had that very prominent nose. But here, it appears on the 73 LeMans, and you also have the fender peak. So you have kind of the fender peak, then this surface that is over top of the lights that kind of fades out into the hood beautifully. You have that flat catwalk area between the fender peak and then the shoulder on the hood that forms the beak or the arrowhead for Pontiac. And it's a very distinctive looking front end and unmistakably Pontiac. But in addition to that arrowhead front end, this car has something else that I love, and that's this dual torpedo shape on the body side that we're going to see a little bit more of in a second. But you can see the crease that's just below the fender peak on the front fender and how that kind of sweeps back into the door. And then you've got another torpedo-like shape on the rear quarter panel. And because it's a Luxury LeMans, you have the fender skirts, which make this car look pretty sweet. I do wish that that crease up front had continued on into the front header panel. It looks like it just kind of terminates rather abruptly there and should have faded out or resolved much better than it did. Probably was done like that for cost reasons. And yes, I'm sure that that's probably why that happened. One other thing I'll point out, looking at the dead-on front view of this car, is the grille texture and this very vertical orientation to the grille texture. This was unique to the Luxury LeMans for 1973. I think it's kind of a handsome look. And in addition to the grille texture, you can see the signature Pontiac twin port grille that had been a part of Pontiac styling ever since the 1959 model year. Now, as we rotate around to the side of the vehicle, here's where you can see that dual torpedo shape. Notice that front one, there's actually multiple creases that form it. It's not just one single crease. There's kind of an upper crease, then there's a lower crease. I can't really call it a lower crease. I'll call it a crease below that. Then there is genuinely a lower crease on the underside. I wish this car didn't have the body side molding or the door edge guards, but it does. And that was pretty typical of the Luxury LeMans. And it also, of course, has the vinyl roof because it's a Luxury LeMans. But I think Pontiac did a decent job with this vinyl roof. You'll see from the rear three-quarter view in a second that the vinyl roof doesn't diminish the look of the crease that comes down over top of the roof and flows into the deck lid. Amazingly, I'm guessing the designers mandated that. But the so-called dual torpedo side here, I think one thing this color does is show that off. You wouldn't really see that in the darker colors. You have to get a lighter colored car to see all of the various surfaces. And to me, this is why this represents one of the best looking Pontiacs of the era. As we transition to the rear view of this car, notice that beautiful rear torpedo shape and how it forms the top of the quarter panel. But then you have this shoulder in between the top of the quarter panel and this surface that kind of forms the deck lid. And then it branches out from the deck lid and you see that crease that's continuous with the roof. What a beautiful design overall. I love how the deck lid is kind of inset from the outer edge of the quarter panel, and that shoulder there that accompanies the deck lid cut is inset as well. It makes this car look especially wide from the rear, And you can tell this car does bulge out around the wheels because of those dual torpedo shapes. Look at how much wider the car is, let's say, around the rear wheel than it is around the door. So an awesome shape, pretty glassy upper too. You have a very large piece of rear quarter glass. This, of course, is one of the Colonnade cars, and on these, they don't have the hardtop, obviously. This is just a coupe with the regular glass and then the fixed rear quarter glass on this particular vehicle. So no hardtop available for the Le Mans in the 1973 model year. And here we have the dead-on rear view. You can see those haunches and the width that they really depict. And notice how that roofline, the C-pillar, kind of pulls back inward to further exacerbate the width and those haunches. It's just a great look from the rear. I do find one thing that's interesting on these is that Pontiac piece of trim that's on the deck lid, that the Pontiac designers didn't want that to just stop at the deck lid cut line. They actually extended it all the way to the tail lamps. I think it would look better if it stopped at the deck lid cut line, but maybe they had modeled it with super tight body fits and finishes, and so it really didn't matter. Of course, this was the 1970s era of GM manufacturing and assembly, and let's just say that the various cuts and gaps and fits and finishes weren't always necessarily the best. But I do love the rear bumper there too, how it's got that little step up in the middle. I think that's cool. I can't remember another car that I have seen something like that on. So it's a one-piece rear bumper, but it has a pretty cool feature, and that really helps encapsulate the license plate. Thought that was interesting. And now this is where the car gets even more interesting, because the yellow doesn't just stop on the exterior, but it continues on into the interior. I think this car would actually look pretty cool with a black interior and a black vinyl top, kind of like a Bumblebee. But it is what it is, so you've got your full-on banana treatment here. And this car does not have air conditioning. It just has, notice it says upper ventilation, open and closed there in the dash panel. It also doesn't have the rally gauge package, because after all, this is a luxury Le Mans. But it does have the bucket seats with the console option. So somebody wanted some semblance of sportiness here in their Le Mans, but they didn't want to equip, as we'll see, this car with an optional engine or with air conditioning, or the rally gauges, so to speak. But they did want the center console. And the center console on this car does look rather cool. This is a 20,000-mile car, and you'll see as we take a look at the interior and the engine bay why it's clear that that is absolutely the case, because this car is just so clean. I do love that 3-spoke wheel that Pontiac had here, and by this point they were putting faux wood trim in it, and I think it looked especially tasteful with that faux wood trim that was trimmed out on the edges with some bright work. Just a very nice detail. And as we transition to the rear seat, I wanted to show this because notice you get the LML, Luxury Le Mans logo there in the center of the rear seat. There's no armrest, but you do get at least the logo. And that was kind of a curious, I don't know how the designers came up with that. Le Mans is one word really, but they've separated into two, and the M is the middle initial. I don't really get it. One unfortunate part about this car, as you can see, is that it looks like somebody cut up the package shelf to put in rear speakers. Ugh, why do people do that? You really have to have your tunes in your car that you need those rear speakers with the package shelf cut up. Can't you just suffice with the dash speaker? I'm guessing that this car may not have been equipped with factory rear speakers, but I don't know. Or somebody wanted to upgrade them. That's one thing that's unfortunate, because it's going to be hard to repair that package shelf. But otherwise, this car is so gosh darn clean and beautiful, despite its very yellow color. And this is where this car gets really interesting, and that's underhood. So for those who don't know what they're looking at, I bet the Pontiac aficionado is saying, what in the world is going on here? This can't be. This must be a junkyard engine that was put in this particular vehicle. And for those who don't know, the Pontiac V8s by this point were painted in like a greenish, silvery, metallic paint. So this is clearly not that. This is painted red. And you'd also see the alternator on the driver's side, not on the passenger side. You'd see the air conditioning compressor on the passenger side. This car doesn't have air, but you notice the alternator on the passenger side. And there are some other little things that are strange. This car, by the way, has an air pump. You can see the air injection pump there near the alternator, and then also the piping. It's pretty easy to see on the driver's side. So what's going on here? Well, this is not a Pontiac V8 underhood, believe it or not. This is a stock. This car was built like this, Chevrolet 350 cubic inch 2-barrel V8. Now, what in the world is going on here? A Chevy 350 in a Pontiac Luxury LeMans? Yes, you know why? This is a Canadian car. And when you bought your Canadian Pontiac Luxury LeMans, or any Pontiac for that matter, any Pontiac LeMans, I should say, if you look at the brochure, it said that the 350 cubic inch V8 that was in your car was dependent upon the various options and configurations that you bought. And I'm guessing that if the car were built in one of the Canadian facilities, it received the Chevrolet V8. If it were built perhaps in one of the U.S. facilities, then it got the Pontiac V8. So here, this is a Canadian-built luxury LeMans with a stock Chevrolet 350 cubic inch V8 underhood. And if we digress for a second here, you can see the engine chart here. This is from the Canadian Pontiac brochure for the LeMans. Notice there are two 350 2-barrel V8s in that little asterisk there. It's a selection of standard 350 V8 determined by model and options ordered. I believe the 150 horsepower variant, which has 270 pound-feet of torque, is the Pontiac V8 with a whopping 7.6 to 1 compression ratio. Hard to believe it's so low, but no, that's what it was. And then the 145 horsepower variant with only 255 pound-feet of torque is the Chevrolet 350 V8. So that's what you got in your Pontiac of this particular era. Now, the other engines, I'm pretty sure, certainly the 400 and the 455, those are Pontiac V8s. There was obviously no Chevrolet 455. There was just a 454. And I believe those 400s, based on the horsepower ratings, are also Pontiac V8s. The 354 barrel, I'm thinking, might be a Chevrolet engine as well, based on the compression ratio and horsepower and torque ratings. If it were a Pontiac, I would think that it would have the lower compression ratio, but put a comment in the comment section if you think differently. Regardless, there clearly were multiple V8 engines that were offered in this particular LeMans. And yes, you could get a stock Chevrolet engine in your Pontiac Luxury LeMans, which is what this car has. And as we pivot back to the engine bay on this car, I have to say I'm surprised about that air pump. Wonder if that was something that was done for Quebec emissions controls, because Canada in general at this point in time had relaxed emission laws versus the United States. At least they did in the 60s. So I'm surprised that this car would come with an air pump on it. But, well, it's clearly there, and somebody definitely didn't add it. And this is not a California car, because that wouldn't have come with a Chevrolet 350 cubic inch V8 underhood. And despite the fact that it doesn't have air, at least it has power steering and power brakes. I actually don't see the power steering pump here, unless it's tucked behind that radiator hose. But I'm pretty sure that this car would have that. Clearly has power brakes on it. And at least on these A-body cars, the engineers were smart enough to put that blower motor in an exposed position as opposed to tucked in the fender well like it was on the full-size cars for so many years during this time frame, which made it basically impossible to service. Both GM and Ford sold kits that you could cut a hole in the fender liner or the wheelhouse and replace the blower motor that way, and then you'd patch it up in case you needed to replace the blower motor as opposed to taking the entire fender assembly off. Not great. This was a much better idea. So what do you think of this fine 1973 luxury LeMans? Is it too yellow? Is it jaundiced? Is it awesome? I'm kind of tempted by this car. It looks pretty sweet. I love the styling. I probably just wish it were, like I said, a little bit different color combination. But, well, you can't go back to your Pontiac dealer and order one of these today. Thanks again for watching.